Well, I was a college freshman. I had been, in my own way, seeking very intensively through my teen years, atheist, and was a kind of a fervent atheist, not a lukewarm atheist at all, and had become really desperate. And had, actually, I decided I was going to, if I couldn't find some answer to the problems of life within a 2-year period, I decided I'd kill myself.
Wow.
And I was, just at that time, suddenly I heard about Buddha and Buddhism. And I had, I heard the name, but I was just a kid and knew nothing about anything apart from America in the 50s and 60s. You know what it was like then. And when I heard about what Buddha said, I was overwhelmed, actually. My whole life changed right then and there. Well, I was, an atheist. I didn't believe in anything spiritual in that sense. But I had come to, the decision I'd come to was I have to find some way not to suffer so much. That life is meaningless, life is hopeless without God, and there's nothing can be done to redeem it. But I just don't want to be miserable like this, and I had to find a real answer to it, not just some set of circumstances that made it better for the time being, but some actual solution to suffering. And Buddha speaks exactly to that. And he gave a diagnosis of it. He said, life is suffering. That was the first, Four Noble Truths was the first one.
Right.
And boy, was he right about that one. And it's not just that we're miserable all the time. It's more basic than that. It's that everything is unsatisfactory in the end.
Right.
Even your happinesses don't really answer. And then suffering returns, and then you get old and you get sick and die. Where is the fulfillingness in all of that? It's a very fundamental problem, not just superficially that I'm, don't have a girlfriend and I'm 16 or don't have a job or whatever the heck it is. Right. It's more, although those things are there too, but more fundamentally the human condition is always undermined by suffering that never seems to be dealt with in the end. Buddha said that, but then his second noble truth is suffering has a cause. The cause of suffering is thirst or desire, craving. And I had never thought that thought in my whole life. And it was amazing. It was obviously true. As long as you want things, you're going to suffer. And the only way, it's not an answer that we always want to hear, but it's the truth. You have to annihilate desire if you want to annihilate suffering. And then the third noble truth is annihilate suffering and you annihilate desire. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. I'm making this real quick. It's actually a much longer story than all of this. But
this is great stuff.
Yeah.
This is really good stuff.
So my whole, I was a kid, I was 17, but my whole...
And you were at Harvard, right?
This is before that, actually. This is in high school.
Okay.
And my whole world was completely transformed overnight, I would say.
Yeah.
I was just a kid, I didn't know anything, but Buddha was the first human being I had ever encountered who seemed to know anything. Again, I had never, my orbit of context was very limited. I had never really had Jesus in my life or anything else. But I felt, this man knows. He knows the truth. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to become a Buddhist. But this was the 60s, so that didn't mean anything as jejun or as commonplace as joining a Buddhist order. It meant I would renounce the world, become a beggar, and seek nirvana. And when it came to that, I was kind of scared of it because, well, you know, what do I do in the winter? It's cold. I was up in, you know, in Boston area, and you know, the winters are terrible. And of course, you could always go to Florida. Wouldn't that kind of be cheating? The point is to overcome your selfish self-nature. So I said, okay, I'll give myself, I had just gotten into Harvard. It was a big deal to my family. Everybody's a success story. They had no idea what was going on in me. So I said, okay, I'll appease everybody. I'll go to college for 1 year, and at the end of my first year, I'll break the bad news to them all, drop out, become a Buddhist beggar, and seek nirvana. And in the meantime, then sort of train myself and prepare I'd fast and get used to, you know, I didn't really see how it was possible to overcome, you know, your desire nature. I mean, it actually, I read about what Buddha had to do, and I just think, man, I just don't have what it takes. But anyway, well, you know, I found this was the truth, and I had to try to do it. So, actually, my parents didn't know what on earth was going on with me. So they did a big driving tour of the western half of America that year, and they dragged me along. I didn't want to go at all. And but I wound up falling in love with the west of America. It's very beautiful. The mountains and the plains, and so after we would go camping each night, and I would then, after we set the camp, I would go out in the woods. Because I was a Buddhist, I was going to meditate. I didn't actually know the first darn thing about Buddhism, really speaking, but I knew meditate. So I would get in the lotus position, and the mosquitoes would bother me. I was thinking, this isn't very promising. I can't deal with a few mosquitoes. But then I started. But this is the meditation I did. It was actually a very good meditation. I would imagine I was sitting there, and the Buddha was sitting about 5 feet away from me. And I would look at him and he would look at me. And that was the meditation. I don't know how I thought of this, but it's actually a good meditation to do. So I would do this every night for a while. And then during the day I started to notice something. I don't know if you've been in a room of people and suddenly, you know, I'll have this, and somebody's looking at me, and I'll look, and somebody is looking at me. You know that feeling? It's almost like somebody's touching your face or something. Yeah. Well, I would have the feeling somebody's looking at me, and I would think, who is it? And then I would remember meditating on Buddha, and look at him, and it was like Buddha was looking at me. And it was the strangest feeling I'd ever had in my whole life, because I didn't actually believe that anybody like Buddha could exist anymore. I was still an atheist. I was I was just a ridiculous excuse for a Buddhist. And I didn't believe in anything transcendental. I just thought you annihilate yourself, you annihilate your false self, and you enter into a bliss state. And what happened then was kind of vague. But I didn't actually believe that there could be anyone like a Buddha now. But it was such a powerful feeling that I got. And I remembered I had read something. It was a book about the early disciples of Buddha. And, you know, Anand, he's the Peter, the Ali, the Erich of that time. And Anand, after Buddha died, said, Buddha is still here. You can talk to him, you can pray, you can call to him. And the scholar who wrote the book said, well, Anand loved Buddha, but he didn't really understand his teaching. Buddha's not there. He's not a deity. He's nothing like that. And when I read it at the time, I thought, yeah, the scholar's right. Anand didn't really understand Buddha. But then I was having this experience of feeling that Buddha was looking at me, and I was thinking, well, who really knew Buddha better? You know, the scholar who wrote the book, or Anand? Well, Anand did. And they would say about nirvana, it's beyond time and beyond space. And I would say that, yeah, beyond time and space, but sort of a platitude. What if it's really true? what would something beyond time and space look like to somebody like me? It would look within time and space as the face of Buddha looking at me. That's how I would understand that. So maybe this really is happening. Maybe this is really true. And maybe there's a lot more to this whole reality than I imagine. Anyway, I would really think about this a lot. I was always interested in these sorts of things. So then I got back home and started going to college, and I was going to drop out at the end of the year and become a beggar and all that kind of thing. And then it was, I remember the date, it was November 22nd. My roommate and I, he actually had been my friend in high school, and we would talk about all these things. It was a Friday afternoon, and I just bought the Rolling Stone magazine, you know, the Rolling Stone, and I had it under my arm. I hadn't looked at it.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And I was going back to my room with my roommate, and my roommate pointed to a poster on the wall and said, "Oh, that's Meher Baba. He says that he's the Buddha." I immediately because I knew that Buddha had said he would come back as the Maitreya Buddha. And I had been thinking, this is the sort of time, the sort of age where that would happen. So immediately I knew the most important thing in the world is for me to find out, is this true? So I looked at it, but it was I'm sure you know the photo. It was like a 1965 passport photo, just a mugshot of Baba. And I had somehow been expecting somebody young or something. And so it was a little bit surprising. But also I sort of imagined Buddha as somebody more remote, and whereas Baba's face is very kind of right here and kind of ordinary in a way, you know, I mean, sort of like relating to ordinary people. So, I don't know, it was a little bit of a surprise. And it was about a lecture that night by Alan Cohen. So this is Harvard, right? All right. It was on LSD, consciousness, and Meher Baba. Now, Harvard was the very place where the experimentation in LSD began. And Alan Cohen, as I then later found out, had been on that original group with Tim Leary and Richard Alpert at Harvard, experimenting with LSD. So that was a topic calculated to draw the crowds, which in fact it did, as it turned out. And it was, so I saw this poster and so I was going to go, of course.
It was LSD and what?
I think it was LSD, consciousness, and Meher Baba. Oh, okay. It was something like that. A talk by Alan Cohen, some such thing. And so my roommate and I were both going to go. So then when I went up to my room and I opened up the Rolling Stone, and the cover story was on Meher Baba. And it was by Pete Townsend, I forget what the title was. And it was kind of a coincidence, but at the time it seemed sort of natural. And so I read the story, of course, and he starts quoting from Baba's message, the highest of the high. And Baba says, I'm not a Satpurush or a Wali or a Pir or a Mahatma, these various things. And then, I am the Ancient One, the highest of the high. And when I read that, it was like somebody rang a bell inside of me that I hadn't even known was there. And I felt, this is the voice of the Buddha. No one else could have said this. And so then that night I went to the talk, and there were about 1,000 people. It was really a huge talk. One of the large auditoriums at Harvard was packed.
Still 1122?
Yeah.
Master numbers.
And it was actually the anniversary of Baba's visit to the Boston area.
Yeah. Powerful date.
Yeah. And so downstairs, there's a downstairs balcony, and it was all full. And Alan is very good with that kind. I mean, the Harvard audience is, when you're talking with something like a spiritual master, okay, in those days, people were more receptive to it, but there are a lot of skeptics who come to anything like this. But Alan really knew how to talk to them. And he said that Meher Baba said that he was God. And that was a real shock, because I had, didn't believe in the existence of God. but I knew that anything MeherBaba said was true. And if he said he was God, well then, God existed. And that was actually the answer to the question, that question.
No, why did you know it at this point?
I just was certain that he was.
When
I read that thing in the highest of the high, I'm the ancient one, the highest of the high.
in the heat houses.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was all blurred together. I was coming, but I just knew
It's
that,
omniscience. It's just knowing is knowing.
It was
It's
just,
just
I
there.
understand.
there's just a certainty was just there.
Yeah.
And I will say that feeling of certainty has never left me since that time. There's never been any, all right, doubts, stupid thoughts flow through, but there's never been any doubt for me since that day. And Baba said he was God. I mean, like infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, he could do miracles, all this stuff. It was a real surprise to me to know that that element was there in the universe. And so when the talk was over, a lot of people were asking questions of Alan Cohen. I didn't even have any questions. But I was sort of standing in the line. I wanted to have a question just because I wanted more. And finally, everybody was gone, and Alan looked at me. I couldn't think of one question to ask. You'd think, like, do you have a mailing list? Or do you have meetings? I mean, I just wanted to keep the conversation going, but I couldn't think of anything at all. When I think about it, it's the most ridiculous thing in the world, because Harvard teaches you to be skeptical of everything, and most particularly skeptical of things like this. And yet I couldn't bring up one question into my mind. So I just went back to my room. I never got in touch with anyone for a couple of months because I hadn't thought to ask if they had a mailing list or anything. And I went to my room and I had this little place I would do the meditation in. And when I was sitting there, I knew that the purpose of my life had been revealed to me, and I was born to follow and serve MeherBaba. And there's never been any question at all since that day. So it was a zap, a 6-hour zap. So that's how I came to Baba.
How are you?
Eric used to encourage us to tell our stories of how we came to Baba, actually.
Yeah.
And there does seem so often to be something, there's the mark of his touches there in his own, how he actually reawakens his link with his lovers. We don't actually do it. It's actually Baba seeking us and finding us out and pulling us to him.
And with a sense of humor, which your story has been full of.
Well, that completely changed everything for me, of course. So within 2 months, I went to the center and met Katie Elizabeth, and within a year and a half, came here to India and met all the Mandali. That was 72, and there were quite a few people here. So my whole life has been completely centered around MeherBaba ever since that time. So that's my Baba story.
Thank you.
So what in all of this, Ford, all these years, what did you do before you moved here? When did you move here? What year?
I moved here in 1993.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the car together.
Yeah, that's right, up in Oregon area. Yeah. Well, I wound up getting, of course, my college degree and then a master's and PhD in medieval literature. And I became a professor of Old English, Anglo-Saxon. And I specialized in Old English and in also Greek, Homeric Greek.
You got a master's in what, sorry?
Master's and PhD running together in medieval studies.
Both the same, okay.
Yeah. Medieval English, which means Old English and Middle English. Old English is like Beowulf, and Middle English, like Chaucer or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And so I became a professor of that field. It turns out to have been a really good specialization for the work that I do now. because when you're dealing with medieval literature, you have to know a wide range of philosophy, theology, all that sort of thing. And also linguistics and language is central to it. And also dealing with manuscripts, because the medieval texts are all based on old manuscripts. So you get a certain amount of training there, just as part of your basic graduate work. Also, it so happened that the professor who was my mentor, who I worked under, he just died about 2 or 3 years ago, but he was widely regarded as the world's leading scholar in comparative oral tradition. Now what that means is studying, for example, Homer as an oral poet. At least that was the view held by this school of scholarship, where he didn't write but had cultivated an art of improvisation. Sort of like in Indian classical music, you know, they don't actually have a musical score, but it's a highly developed art form. It's not as though they're just kind of winging it. You've heard rags on, Ravi Shankar, like that. So that oral poetry would be composed in that way. And so I was quite versed in that. I wrote a lot of articles, and I had a book dealing with these things. And it turns out to be quite pertinent to the situation of Baba's discoursing, because he actually wasn't speaking, it wasn't oral in that sense, but his, like the discourses I'm working on right now, Tiffin lectures, these were live, and they weren't, he's not like Baba wrote out a script and then went out and read it to the Mandali. No, he was communicating extemporaneously to them, and what got written down was a register of what he had said. So that was exactly the topic in which I became a specialist. I also had another major professor, Walter Ong was his name, who was again one of the leading scholars in the whole world in exactly this subject. So it turns out that the branches of scholarship that I got a training in were wonderfully preparatory for the work that I'm doing now, in Baba's words. Because now we're working with records of dictations that he gave and trying to reconstruct what he said. So that was the very kind of thing which I studied as a professor.
Can you see that that was all part of a plan?
Well, it looks like it. It looks like it to me.
Not that you knew it.
No, I didn't at the time.
But it was known upstairs.
Yeah, I very much felt. When I came here in 1993, actually Bao invited me to come. So I just left my job. It was kind of a reckless move. I had just gotten tenure. I had just, with tenure you have a lifetime job. So it was like throwing away a lifetime security job. And I had just had a book published by Princeton University Press, which is one of the leading presses in the whole world, academic presses. So I really had a academic career. My mentor was the leader and was a superstar. Both of them were superstars. So I had a real golden road ahead of me. But I never wanted it. I never liked it. I just wanted to live for Baba. I was just doing this because I had to do something in the world. So when Bao asked me to come, I felt like Baba was saying to me, "All right, Ward, you've been complaining all these years how you want to be, working for me and not for the world. Well, are you coming or aren't you?" So I had very little savings at that time, so I had to live here like a church mouse for the first 15 years, as others have done, like $100 a month or $150 a month, watching every penny. But the funny thing is, even though my parents were very upset,
good.
You can, from every point of view, every worldly point of view, they were completely right. It was a ridiculous thing to do, because I would never get a job like that again. These kinds of jobs are real impossible to get. Actually, when I've been applying for jobs, in English literature, getting jobs is really, good jobs is really impossible. And as if that wasn't bad enough already, having a specialization in Old English, it's not as though you put out your resume and wait for the offers to come flying in. I mean, they're just, in a whole year, there might not be one position that specialized in that. So
What did your department think when you up and resigned? What did you say to them?
I just kind of, from Lord of the Rings, how Bilbo just put on a ring and disappeared.
Yeah.
That's what I did.
What did you do?
I just told them I was leaving and never gave an explanation, and I was gone. So the people in my world couldn't figure out what on earth had happened. I didn't know what was I supposed to say.
I rode a bus with you to Marizad one time only. I remember only one sentence you said, and it was that you couldn't see any reason to study literature if it wasn't about God, period.
Yeah, that's really what I felt.
That's how I've known Moore Park since.
I mean, I was doing it because I had to do something, and it's what I was fitted to do. And
then
also when I was in graduate school, I actually hated academia.
Good.
I mean, I hate that the perverted intellect right now is so sick. I really kind of love, not the literature itself. I like Homer is fantastic. The literature is wonderful, but the way that intellectuals have gone with it right now is, anyway, that's a whole subject. I found it revolting. So it was really torture to be in that world. But when I was applying for jobs, I couldn't get any kind of a decent job. Any job, even terrible jobs. And then I got a on-campus interview at LSU. This is actually a plum of a job. It was a research institution. It would be research position. And I was not getting terrible jobs. And the last day of the on-campus interview, usually you go back home, and in 2 or 3 weeks they tell you yes or no. But I was going to get on the plane. The chairman of the department said, we want to let you know we're offering you this position. Wow. And you know what day it was? January 31st.
Yeah, of course.
So it seemed to me like a clear sign from Baba.
You'd have to be brain dead not to figure that out.
So I felt Baba gave me that job. I was not getting awful jobs, the sorts of jobs that I'd been offered. I would have said yes and then gone and shot myself, those kinds of jobs. So, and it wound up giving me a real training in all the things that I do now. I didn't need any really to learn more about spirituality or God or theology. I mean, those things I was fine with on my own, but I needed to know about linguistics, manuscripts, working with sort of a intercultural environment, because actually Baba was doing that too. He was under the British Raj, a foreign, imperial overlord to his country. He was himself from Iran, had Farsi, Persian in his own background. He was a Zoroastrian in a Hindu, Muslim country like that. So it was this big cultural mix that he was involved in. And actually medieval literature was very much like that in many ways. Because at least what I was working with, there was an interaction between these different societies and different literatures. So it was really an excellent training. I had no idea. And when I first came here, I wasn't doing anything like this. I was secretary, as others here have been. And so I was taking dictation and compiling lists and addresses and writing.
What exactly did Bouty say to you to offer you to come and work here? What kind of job did he offer you? To come and work just with him, or you had no clue what you'd be doing?
I was working with him. John Connor had been his personal secretary for 10 years or more. And John left. He's married to Barbara. And I wasn't there at the time. But I think it was through the Pearsons that I heard, Christy Pearson, that Val was going to have 2 people, myself and Freeman. And I had brought this up with the Mandali several times, how I wanted to live there and become a resident, but it actually wasn't practical from my point of view either. One thing was I only had, an assistant professor doesn't get much salary, and so I had no savings to speak of. I think when I came here I had maybe $20,000. And that was to last me for the rest of my life, as far as I knew. So, and I was leaving a job, and if I decided I wanted to go back again, I could wave my resume. Old English scholar looking for a job, and wait for the offers to compete with each other. There was, I don't know what I would have done if I had to go back. But so I just, when Bao asked, I just left it. I just put on my magic ring and vanished. And so I was, for about 4 or 5 years, was engaged in, letters and dictation, and then Bao became the chairman in '96, and so there was a lot of secretarial work to do. And then in 1998, '97, all of a sudden this cache of manuscripts came into light. Merwan Jasawala was the one who knew about them, and Erich, of course, and finally Erich said,
Did you say Bob became chairman in 1998?
96. 96,
okay.
And when Mani died.
Okay.
And he was, of course, going to the States every year doing world tours. And then Merwan had been in conversation with his brother Erich about this group of manuscripts that had been found shortly after Baba dropped the body. And really, they had been kept very much secret. No one knew about them. Even Baba didn't know about them. And then in 1997, at the end of one of our publication committee meetings, we've been dealing with regular matters. I think the publication committee had just been created the year before. And Merwan said, we were just about to end it, and Merwan said, I have one, before we break, I wanted to mention something. And he brought up infinite intelligence and these manuscripts, which, was a total blockbuster. None of us had the slightest idea that there was anything like this in the picture. And Bao was in America at the time, but he was really thrilled by the news when he heard. So when I came back
At that time you were not working with Bao?
he had just left for America, so I was
So you didn't travel with him?
No, I was back in the trust office.
Okay, but you were still part of his team? I'm just trying to figure out the chronology.
Yeah, there wasn't a team to the extent there is now. There's
You and Freeman.
Me and Freeman. And Freeman would go with Bao on tours to America. And I would stay back here. And I would go to America a little bit later, in June to August, and stay with my parents. So when I came back from America, Bao was all ready to go on infinite intelligence. And actually, even though he was chairman, he completely closed his office every day from 9 to 2. And all he did was infinite intelligence. So ever since that, I had no idea that I would be working on scholarly stuff again, which is what this is. In fact, my first 4 years here, that scholarly world seemed like another lifetime. I just thought, well, that is gone. I was glad for it to be gone, actually. The scholarly world itself I really disliked. And that was completely out of my picture, and all of a sudden it came back again without any warning at all. And so ever since then, that's been my work. Completely immersed in these records of Baba's discourses. It's been mostly the 1920s, although there have been other things that have come too. We did an edition of the Discourses, the revised 6th edition of the Discourses, and other things like that have come up. But the main work has been Baba's, you could call it early dispensation from Baba, material from the 1920s that had just gotten completely buried, really, until 1997. There's just this stash of stuff that nobody had looked at. Yeah, this all came up suddenly. I don't think anybody knew that this was there. It was a different age back then. I mean, the Mandali weren't interested in old manuscripts, that wasn't their role. They'd lived with Baba, they had the living avatar, and they were sharing him with people who came. That was what they had to give. But we're in a different age now. I mean, the people who actually live their lives with the avatar, almost all of them are gone now. It's not the research and literary stuff that I minded, it was the perverted intellect of the academia that I couldn't stand. But working with Baba's material, there's none of that. This is the truth, the beautiful truth that the avatar has revealed. It actually, God Speaks and Infinite Intelligence, I would say, are the two books we have from Meher Baba that are closest to each other in a way. That they're really, it's a wretched word, but philosophical. We don't have a good English word for what Baba's giving. It's not philosophy in the ordinary way. But where Baba is explaining God and creation. The Discourses do that also. They're a real masterpiece. But the Discourses have a very different purpose and audience in view. They're not intended to explain high philosophy for its own sake. They're really intended for the seeker of God to give you the understanding that you need on various topics to live a life for God. And in the course of doing that, the Discourses give wonderful stuff. I mean, they're really, really magnificent. But God Speaks is not that way. God Speaks really is kind of high philosophy, and Baba directly takes on the matter of ultimate truth. And, since Infinite Intelligence came up in 1997, one of the things I've done a lot is, on my own time, or sort of my light reading before I go to bed, will be something like Shankaracharya's Brahmasutra Bhashya. I actually enjoy those things. And, so I've been reading.
I wouldn't have any idea how to spell that.
Brahmasutra Bhashya. It's
Brahmasutra Bhashya.
B-H-A-S-Y-A. Yeah, Baba's, of course, you're acquainted with what Don Stevens reports of a meeting with Baba, where
I'm not.
I think Don had been talking to Baba about how some people say not to read Baba's books because they're just intellectual, and Baba was saying, "What, Don? People say that about my books?" This is Don's work, so Baba was naturally taking it. And then Baba had a long conversation with Eric right there in Gujarati. And finally, at the end of it, Eric said, "It's difficult to explain what Baba is trying to say, but it's something like this, that in his words, there are something like atom bombs." And I am a complete believer in the atom bombs. I really do. And my experience is, when you really delve into Baba's words, for those drawn to this, I'm not saying that everybody should, but I will say, as one who has done it, this power is there. And it's not just a power of projection, where I'm projecting it, and I'm imagining it, or I'm creating it myself. No, it's actually there. Like Judy, what you were saying, there's a power of light, a force that is in Baba's words. And here's the thing about the relation. Baba didn't actually say, discard your intellect, never use your intellect. He said it needs to be integrated with the heart. Mm-hmm. If there's only heart and no mind, the heart is ineffective. Mm-hmm. The heart spins its wheels and can never do anything. What is actually ideal is to have both working in complete coordination and balance, each playing its proper role. Sometimes when people, since I do work in this, study and writing and intellectual work is central to what I do. And I much appreciate the criticism of that people give, and Baba himself said, intellectualism by itself is a dead end, it is utterly sterile. But on the other hand, when I hear people say things like, it's one thing to say God speaks, has nothing for me. Okay, that could be. If somebody that may be true for someone. I used to spend a lot of time with Korshed. I wasn't going to be the one to say, well, Korshed, you really need to educate yourself. A little bit of reading of God speaks, It didn't appear to me that she needed it. But if I say, God speaks has nothing for me, and it has nothing for anyone else either, at that point, I check out and say, how do you know that?
Right.
And in fact, when people say, you should just use your heart and not use your intellect. Okay. Ramakrishna Paramahansa comes to me and says that, and I say, brother, I accept what you say. Okay. Most other people, and I think, I maybe not say it loud, have you stopped your mind?
Right.
It appears to me that, that little voice, from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to bed, that stupid voice is talking and talking and talking, and it never shuts up. Isn't that true? Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's spiritual, sometimes it's low life, sometimes it's loving towards others, critical, but it never shuts up. That is the voice of the mind. So if you haven't silenced the voice of your mind,
Right.
I would suggest hold back your criticisms of God speaks a little bit, because this may have a role. Things like God Speaks or Discourses or Infinite Intelligence or these other books, for those who use these tools, what they do to the mind is that they cut all this cobweb, garbage, crap of mind, that burn it, they wash it away, and give you beautiful thoughts, penetrating, visionary thoughts, so far as thoughts go, full of light, like searchlights that penetrate through the darkness and illuminate things. So instead of the crap of all the time, you have thoughts like this, like Plato, like Shankaracharya, the kinds of thoughts that illuminate everything and show the heart too. The heart needs clarity. The mind can give a lot. Baba uses a phrase in the Discourses someplace, the heart needs to be illuminated by the mind. The mind has a role to play in this. So the study of Baba's books is like nothing else. Well, Baba did he did affirm a basic insight of Hinduism, actually. It's there in the other religions also, but it's most explicit in Hinduism, that there are fundamentally three paths. The path of knowledge, path of action, and the path of devotion or love in its higher aspect. And in fact, Baba gave the metaphysical foundation for that, which is the first time that's ever been done. But the Bhagavad Gita is all about this.
Knowledge, devotion, and what?
Knowledge, action, and devotion, or love in its higher aspect. And karma. So the terms for this in Hinduism would be Jnana Yoga, with the Gyan Marg. Gyan means knowledge. Karma Yoga, or Karma Marg, the action path. And Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga, in its sort of ordinary aspect, is the world of religious ritualism, worship. But in its higher aspect, or Para Bhakti, it's a term Baba uses in the Discourses, it becomes real love. It graduates into higher love. And these three paths are based, and this is new from Baba. I haven't been able to find this. Sometimes people will tell me that it's here or it's there, but I haven't found it anywhere. The triune nature of God is now knowledge, power, and bliss. That's the first time this has really been revealed. This is right in God Speaks. In fact, in the 1920s to the 60s, Baba continued to affirm this is the triune nature of God. And the triune nature of God, knowledge, power, and bliss, is the basis for the mental, subtle, and gross spheres, and it's also the basis for the three yogas. The yoga of knowledge is based on God's nature as knowledge. The yoga of action is based on God's nature as power, right? Mm-hmm. Action is the implementation of power, right? And the path of bhakti or devotion or love is based on God's nature as bliss, because love is very blissful. Or, when you get into the dualistic sphere, it's agony and ecstasy. It's bliss in agony, right? That's the characteristic of love. So, Baba's lovers are of various types. You know, you'll see some who are just pure devotion, love, bhakti. And that is the one that Baba did prioritize most when it comes down to the path of love and the path of simple devotion. But that's not all. Baba actually, I have often said, I said to Gary Kleiner one time, we would talk about this, these three paths. I said, I think Baba gave, you know, sort of like, you go to Pune, some people will get the Jeswala blend of tea, you know, the proper mix of tea. Well, the Baba blend of the three yogas I'm talking about. And of course, there's a lot of individual variation, but there is a kind of a general overall blend, it seems to me. And I would rate it at about maybe 40% bhakti, maybe 30-35% karma, and say 25% knowledge or jnana. That's what I said to Gary, and Gary said, no. It's 80% bhakti, and 5% jnana. And here's what I would say to that. On the prestige scale, that's true. But actually, we as Baba lovers don't do the things that bhakti groups do. Like, I don't know, Hare Krishna, you know, chanting Hare Krishna. Do we chant?
No.
We don't. A lot of the standard bhakti practices are not general among Baba lovers at all. Now, the devotional love, I'm sort of, I think love actually encompasses all of these, to tell the truth. I think it's greater than just this one path. But that path, that approach, is strongly emphasized in much of what Baba gave us. But here's the other thing. The other paths actually Baba reinforced too. How can you hold a job and not practice karma? Tell me how to do it. You just go around, oh, MeherBaba, don't bother me, boss. I'm remembering Baba. Well, you won't keep your job for very long.
Yeah.
And let's suppose you have to do some routine function. You're a salesman, or you're, a secretary, or whatever it may be. You can't spend all your time just with devotional remembrance of MeherBaba. Now, can you? It's not possible. What you have to do, if you're really going to, it seems to me, if you're really going to try to do this as a spiritual aspirant, is practice karma yoga. That is, you do your duty and do it for God's sake and renounce the fruit of action, right?
Right.
What other way is there in that circumstance? You have to be sometimes mentally absorbed in what you're doing. Let's suppose you're a therapist, and let's suppose the person you're dealing with is a mess of lust, greed, and anger. So you practice Gyan yoga and dissociate yourself? No, you can't do that. You have to actually deal with the person, right? So, but you have to deal with a person with detachment. So it seems to me anyone who lives a life in the world in a serious way has got to do karma yoga. And a lot of what Baba has to say in the Discourses is precisely karma yoga, like building the provisional ego, for example.
Right.
That's a karma yoga technique.
Right.
And so far as knowledge or jnana yoga, actually, Baba's lovers know a heck of a lot. we have really got a really good education in a lot of things. We know that the goal of life is the realization of God. You know, we know the difference between an avatar and a sadguru. How many people in the world could explain that? We know about the law of karma. We know evolution, reincarnation, involution. There's actually a lot of education we've had, and it's of practical relevance. Like if I'm feeling really, really pissed at someone, I'd like to just punch them in the face. My education might be one thing that says, this will karmically bind you. Baba said this and Baba said that. And my understanding could be helpful in guiding my action. Isn't that true of all of us? Now, we may not always succeed in that respect. So I actually think Baba has given us a blend of all three of these. That's really a part of the Baba culture we have. Now, you'll get some people who are much more one way than another. That's true. But I think he's given a wonderful integrated blend of the different paths that is admirably suited to the age we live in.
Did he say anything about spiritual growth is possible only through incarnating into a body?
Well, you have to be in a body to spend your sinceres and work out your karma.
Right. Life is not a waste, so to speak. It's a purposeful vehicle for...
Without a doubt, yeah.
Right.
You have to. You can't progress anywhere without incarnating. Well, I think where the problem of words arises is when they get dissociated from action. And when they're not lived.
Right.
Baba talked about a huge problem, and actually Dr. Deshmukh's book, Sparks of the Truth, is a wonderful discourse on this, where he's basing what he says directly on Baba's own teachings, that the chasm between theory and practice is one of the tragedies of the modern age. And words become vacuous when they are separated from action.
Oh, talk your walk. Yeah. Talk your walk, not walk your talk.
Yeah, but now when words are actually the living expression of the truth, and when they are taken to heart and put into one's life, then they become potent vehicles of the truth. Now, Baba's own words, as he's referring to...
As an atom bomb.
As an atom bomb, yeah. Baba, Don Stevens had mentioned how Baba had said there are atom bombs in his words. And, I take that as a tremendous spiritual charge, a tremendous force of light and knowledge and power, all of which is directly related to experience, too. When Baba's words are read properly, in my opinion, they are directly connected with our experience. I don't think they're dissociated at all. But if they're read superficially in just a mental way, then this problem arises. They become sterile and vacuous and of little worth. But that's actually not the fault of Baba's words, it's the fault of the approach to them. But this is a path, this is central to my own work. I work with words all the time. I'm a words guy. I write and editing, songs and poetry. Words are very central to that. But the key to that is how to make them alive, not something sterile and dead and merely mental. And keeping the vital connection with the living truth is the key to it. And I do think that Baba's words can be studied in a way that helps with this. This is my own particular line. I was a professor, I can't help it, it's just, my line. But I do really believe from my own experience that if you really study Baba's words with an open mind and an open heart, all sorts of doors will open. And my experience, once again, is that to read Baba's words in any way is a good thing, actually. If you feel drawn to it, okay, this world is full of all these maps, and they're marked treasure here, treasure there. And you go to the world's maps and you dig and you find it's a dirty, stinky bone and some dog buried. The world's treasures stink. They're worthless. Baba's maps mark real treasures. And if you go to Baba's words that way, you will find treasures if you persist. Anyone will. Anyone will. But I also think that there is a value to really studying Baba's words in a disciplined way. It's just what I do, so I see the value of my own line of activity, as we all do. We all become aware of what can be gained to whatever path you're on. But so I'm aware of this too. If you really, really are focused and disciplined, and here's one of the things I've learned about studying Baba's words, where often I'll see sometimes people miss the mark here, in my opinion. To really be attentive to what Baba wants to talk about, rather than what I'm interested in. If Baba keeps bringing some subject up, this is one of the real keys for me. I will say, why is Baba interested in this? And asking that question will lead to really good results. So, may not be the best example, but I noticed this a bunch of years ago. I really don't mean to be criticizing anybody in this, but my point is, there's a value to putting aside your own preconceptions and really trying to observe what Baba is saying, not my own agendas. I was at a meeting a couple of years ago where we were reading Baba's Discourse on the Occult. You know, there are 3 discourses on the occult. They're wonderful. And after reading one of the discourses in a group, there was a discussion about it. And what everybody was saying was, well, you know, I've never had any interest in the occult, and Baba really discouraged the occult. That kind of comment. And what struck me was, yes, it is true, the Mandali have told us that. Yes, it is true in his communications, that was Baba's emphasis. I agree with that. But that actually isn't what the discourse said.
No.
The discourse was actually talking, you know, sort of, well, there are dangers in the occult, but there are things you can gain from it, like that. And I'm not pitching that either one of those lines, but what I am saying is, when we're reading Baba's discourse on the occult, let's actually pause to take note of what Baba is saying about it, and not just replay what we've been told by the Mandali. I'm not criticizing the Mandali, don't get me wrong in that, I'm really not. And one of the insights this would lead me to remark on is that Baba's communication to his Mandali and his close ones on the subject of the occult was rather different from what he gave out to the world. Now, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And if you never notice what Baba said in the discourse in the first place, you're never going to see this. And so I would ask myself, well, why is this? Because these discourses are going to be for all humanity for thousands of years. And you're going to have people coming to Baba as the avatar of the age who, for heaven's sakes, have had occult experiences. Let's suppose you get a Phyllis Frederick. What's she supposed to do about it? She sees all this stuff, you know? And you come to Baba and you want to say, Baba, what is the occult about? And what you get is Baba saying, don't touch the occult, don't involve yourself in the occult. Well, Baba was saying that to his close ones, people right around him, and he was steering, and his lovers, steering them away from that. But for humanity at large, he was giving a very universal treatment of the subject. And if you never take the time to actually notice what Baba is saying, what I've said will never occur to you. I don't know if this is clear what I'm saying. There are a lot of cases where I'll see people will read something and then they'll just replay their old agenda. So part of what I think of as a disciplined approach to Baba's words, the study of Baba's words, is it can often happen in groups to actually have the discipline to put aside projections and put aside preconceptions, whatever they are. Like in this case, the agenda about what the Mandali had said about the occult, that's an extremely good agenda. That's part of the real teaching we got. I'm not knocking that at all. But whatever the agenda is, good or bad, take the moment to put it aside and say, what is Baba saying? What is Baba actually saying? And I do think that if one approaches Baba's words in that way, all sorts of things open up to you that will never open up to you otherwise. So it's all speculative. But I'm quite convinced that Baba dictated this probably April, May, June, July, something like that, 1926. So during the first year of his silence. And it's a write-up record by the Mandali of dictations he gave. That's an opinion. There's nothing in the manuscript that says that. But there are a lot of grounds for it. I mean, I've given talks about this as an internet. So as soon as this came up, I immediately felt that what this job really would entail for me, I mean, beyond the editorial work, was to really come to a deeper understanding of what MeherBaba's teachings were and how they related to the greater world of philosophy, or, you know, English doesn't have a good word for this. It's, what do you say, theology, theosophy, none of these words get it, but revealed truth.
Mysticism?
Yeah, but mysticism a lot of times is practice, not the expounding of the subject, you know, so, I don't know, hikmah in Arabic, it's not even that. Darshana is a word used in India. Anyway, when I use philosophy, I don't mean it in the usual way. I mean MeherBaba's explanations for humanity about God and truth. Yeah, but when I say philosophy, I mean that. We just don't have an adequate English word for what God speaks is.
Let's have 3 or 4 words.
Yeah, because, you know, Baba's not practicing philosophy. He's directly revealing and explaining truth itself, which he embodies. And in a form suited to this age. So it's something quite different. I mean, the Quran was that in its own time. The Gita was that. It belongs to that category of thing. But I started studying, you know, I've always been interested in this, but in a renewed effort, reading some of the great traditions, Vedanta and Sufism, and Buddhism, Christian mysticism, and have done a lot of that over the last 20 years. I do it all the time. And I can really say that what MeherBaba has given is quite extraordinary, and there's nothing like it that I see anywhere. Baba always seemed almost to disparage his own philosophical works, call them that, say, oh, this is just a headache. And part of his reason, clearly, is to emphasize you can't find God through the intellect, you can't find God through thinking. You know, God has to be won through love, and that was always his emphasis. It would give you the impression, though, that God speaks and discourses and infinite intelligence are second-rate, and that is not true at all. There's nothing like these books. God Speaks is really the first of its kind I've ever seen. The closest to that would be Vedanta, I would say, and Shankaracharya, or the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, these works are magnificent, no doubt about it. But nowhere do you find the kind of explanations that Baba has given. I haven't found it anywhere, and I've been looking all over the place.
Explanations of
God and creation.
God and creation.
Yeah. For example, this is actually the centerpiece of Baba's philosophy, is the divine theme. And what that was the name he gave to it. And that was the idea he put forward more than anything else. And what the divine theme is the story of the journey of the soul.
The circle.
And yeah, most of us are familiar with it because Baba actually, for infinite intelligence, it's there, although it's not featured. But when Baba went to Hollywood, the movie he wanted to make was on the divine theme. In the Discourses, when Baba gave a meditation there, you know the 8 Discourses in meditation, the 4th of them, it actually gives a meditation, a reading meditation, with instructions how to use it. You're supposed to read it every day, and there's a whole process that Baba outlines there. Well, what that meditation is on is the divine theme. Baba had a gathering here at Meherabad, at the, you know where the Sai Darbar is? There's a plaque, plaques is there, in that space between the highway and the railway tracks. It's one of the old buildings. And on that platform, he had a gathering where he called 125 men from all around India. And the focus of it was a meditation, a group meditation on a chart. And the chart was on the divine theme. And then in 1955, God Speaks is an expanded development of the divine theme. That's its core. So that is actually the central idea Baba wanted humanity to get. And it's a completely new idea. If anybody, I keep saying, if anybody is acquainted with someone having explained this before, please tell me, so I won't go around misinforming people. But what the divine theme is, you all are familiar with it. In the beginningless beginning, God had a whim to know himself. And out of that whim was precipitated the creation, the false universe. And innumerable drop souls came into seeming existence. First as stone, or actually through gaseous kingdoms, through stone, metal, plant, worm, fish, bird, animal, and human. One form after another in an interminable series of rebirth, transmigration, you could say. Each soul goes through this progression, which has as its aim the evolution of consciousness. This is a new part to the story which had not been given before. Actually, I'm not aware that even in Hinduism this story is told, that you go through a transmigratory sequence through which consciousness is evolved and through which a human form is achieved at the end. I don't see that in Hinduism at all. Hinduism is like, if I'm a bad guy, I get reborn as a cockroach. That still seems to be a wide-held belief.
What is that? The chart, was it Rano
Gali,
Gali that she drew, so we have the picture.
Right, that one chart is probably the best emblem. It's in God Speaks.
So clear.
It wasn't in the first edition of God Speaks. It got put into the second edition.
Right.
But then human form is achieved through the evolution of consciousness. For God to answer the question, who am I? God has to be conscious, right? You can't answer that question if you're still asleep. You have to be awake. So the whole journey of evolution is to wake up, for God to wake up. That's its only purpose, which is achieved only in the human form.
Right.
Because the human form is the only form adequate to contain as a container of full consciousness. And once having achieved human form, there's no further evolution of form. It's the end of evolution. And then, but having won the human form, which is a great victory after millions, and Baba said you pass through 50 crore sleeps of death in the journey of the soul, and that's 500 million. So
To human consciousness?
No, that's total.
The entire 50 crore.
But most of that would be achieving.
I'm not able to keep up with everything.
Sure.
The whole journey of the evolution is to wake up. Once having achieved human form, there is no, and
no higher
normally
form.
I'm thinking the way you're thinking, and so I can put it there. But at that, I don't know.
There's no further form.
No further form.
That's the end of the evolution of form.
Okay.
Evolution ends there. And
but you were talking about the Hindus saying that you can go back to a cockroach or
get reborn through lower
and so
form.
You're saying you don't think Baba says that's possible?
Baba clearly says that it's not possible.
Right.
Once having achieved the human
Oh,
form,
I thought he did.
well, there's one exception, but basically, no. Once having achieved human form, God has the consciousness required to answer the question, who am I? But the great tragedy is that he doesn't do that because God has acquired all these sanskaras as a means of gathering consciousness in the first place. And so when you become a human being, instead of answering the question, who am I, you start living out your sanskaras. And this begins the long, endless cycle of reincarnation, which is the next phase of the journey of the soul, where you spend your sanskaras, but in the course of spending them, you take the enjoyment or suffering of them, you get a new batch, and you get reborn. And then you spend those sanskaras and get new ones and get reborn, and on it goes. Because the jivatma in human form hasn't the slightest idea what the purpose of life is. Having just been a monkey, I have those thoughts are utterly remote to my consciousness. I'm not thinking about God. The idea of God never occurs to me. So you go through 8,400,000 lifetimes in human form, Brabazon, 84 lakhs of rebirths, hundreds of millions of years. And this is the second long stage in the journey of the soul. The first is the evolution of consciousness, and the second is reincarnation, which is a vast, long exercise in futility, you might say, as you replay the same agendas over and over and over and over again. So if any of us ever have the experience that we're doing things over and over and over again, it is an old habit.
That just seems familiar, huh?
Millions of lifetimes are spent doing it until you start to get sick of it and start to say, what is the purpose of all of this? What am I doing here? Does God exist? And finally, when this question acquires sufficient urgency, where you simply can't stand anymore to continue through the cycling of ups and downs, the law of karma, you start to find your way into the spiritual path. And that inaugurates the last phase of the journey of the soul, which is involution of consciousness. And there are, as you all know, 6 planes of involution of consciousness which culminate in the 7th, which is God realization. And in the course of that, first you pass through the subtle world. There's a gross, subtle, and mental sphere. All of this stuff has been explained by Baba so much more clearly than anybody else I have ever seen.